In the dark chapters of human history, there always emerge some chilling figures. Cloaked in human skin, they are monsters devoid of morality and legal constraints, pushing the boundaries of evil to the extreme as serial killers. Westley Allan Dodd, a convicted American serial killer, is one such individual. Parks, libraries, and movie theaters, places that should be havens for children's joyful growth, became his hunting grounds. His targets were the most innocent group, naive and unsuspecting young boys. He disguised himself as a friendly adult, exploiting children's trust, using candies and toys as bait to lure them to secluded corners. There, he satisfied his twisted desires through sexual assault, then brutally ended the children's lives with a cold blade. His diary was filled with morbid fantasies and violent desires. Not only did he record his crimes, but he also attempted to warn parents on how to protect their children from sexual assault through a pamphlet, posing as an expert. Before his execution, he claimed to have found God and expressed so-called apologies to his victims. He said, "I believe in the teachings of the Bible. I will go to heaven, although I have doubts about it, but I really want to believe that I can find those 3 little boys, give them a hug, and tell them how sorry I am. I wish to love them with true love and not harm them in any way." But no matter what he said, it couldn't change the fact that he was a criminal or make the families he hurt feel better. On Monday, July 3, 1961, Westley was born in Toppenish, Yakima County, Washington. This small city, located in the Yakima Valley, is notorious for its high crime rates, particularly violent and property crimes, and has a population predominantly composed of Native Americans and ethnic minorities. Wesley's family environment was fraught with tension and violence. His parents had an extremely hostile relationship, frequently engaging in fierce arguments and even physical altercations. On one occasion, his father injured his mother's eye during a quarrel, leaving Westley, the eldest son, and his brother to tremble as they witnessed the scene. If they attempted to intervene, their father would punish them with a belt. Westley never heard any affectionate words from his parents, such as, "I love you." This emotional void left him feeling lonely and neglected. When Westley was arrested for murder, his father admitted to being overly strict in disciplining his children, while his mother expressed shock and anguish over his crimes, denying any lack of a positive family atmosphere. However, in 2016, their other son was arrested for attempting to sexually abuse a 13-year-old girl, further exposing the severe issues in the family's upbringing and socialization. During Wesley's formative years, he preferred contact with boys his own age over girls. At the age of 9, he showed a preference for boys, and this tendency became more pronounced at the age of 13, when he began contacting boys in the neighborhood and displaying some unusual behavior. His father noticed the behavior and inquired about it with a local newspaper and learned that it could be homosexual-like behavior. However, the father chose to ignore the warning, believing Wesley to be a well-behaved child who had never had a problem with drugs, alcohol, or tobacco. On July 3, 1976, his 15th birthday, a day that should have been filled with blessings and celebration, became the starting point of his family's disintegration. On this day, his parents erupted into a fierce argument. Due to long-standing relationship issues, his mother decided to file for divorce. This news caused his father to emotionally collapse, even attempting suicide. As a result, Wesley received no birthday wishes. Instead, he was shadowed by the family's breakdown in his father's suicide attempt. After the divorce, Wesley and his brother moved with their mother to Vancouver, Washington. Despite living with his mother, he still felt a lack of love and support at home. After his arrest, he repeatedly mentioned his mother's coldness and her inability to provide emotional care. Although they moved to Vancouver, Wesley continued to attend Richland High School, a public school where he was unpopular. No social groups were willing to accept him, and no one wanted to befriend him. This isolation stemmed from his early tendencies toward animal abuse and child harassment, as well as a strong interest in violence and control. During high school, his criminal behavior gradually escalated. He began molesting children, starting with his cousin and then sexually harassing neighborhood children. He was also arrested for indecent exposure and lewd conduct, but because he was a minor, the police could only release him and recommend juvenile psychological counseling. However, this lenient handling did not deter his criminal behavior. Instead, it made him more brazen. In August 1981, 20-year-old Wesley attempted to kidnap 2 girls in Vancouver. Fortunately, the girls quickly sensed the danger and escaped. They reported the incident to the local police, providing detailed descriptions of the perpetrator's appearance, behavior, and his attempt to lure them. However, the police took no substantive action against Wesley, No arrest, no in-depth investigation into his background or behavioral patterns. The following month, Westley enlisted in the U.S. Navy and was assigned to the submarine base in Bangor, Washington. During this time, his behavior spiraled out of control. He began targeting children living near the base, exploiting his military status and relatively free movement to find opportunities to approach and abuse these children. In one incident, Westley offered a group of boys $50 to accompany him to a motel room to play strip poker. This proposal alarmed the boys, who reported Wesley's behavior to the police. During interrogation, Westley unabashedly admitted that he had indeed planned to molest the boys. Incredibly, he was eventually released without facing any formal charges. Shortly afterward, Westley was arrested again for exposing himself to a boy. This time, his behavior drew the attention of the military. The Navy conducted an internal investigation and decided to discharge him dishonorably. Despite being expelled from the Navy, Westley was only sentenced to 19 days in jail and required to undergo court-ordered psychological counseling. However, these lenient punishments did not stop his criminal activities. Wesley's life was almost entirely centered around planning how to approach and exploit children. Every step he took was meticulously designed to ensure he could easily access potential victims. To achieve this sinister goal, he chose to move into an apartment building inhabited by multiple families with children. Additionally, he took on jobs such as a charity truck driver, which not only allowed him freedom of movement, but also provided him with convenient access to vulnerable groups in the community. In the apartment building, Westley repeatedly molested his neighbor's preschool-aged children. Although these actions were discovered by the children's mother, she refused to file formal charges with the police out of concern for the psychological trauma it might cause her child. By 1987, Wesley's behavior had become even more brazen. He attempted to lure a young boy into an empty building, clearly intending to commit further acts of abuse. However, the boy displayed remarkable alertness, refused Wesley's invitation, and reported the incident to the police. The police subsequently intervened, and upon learning of Wesley's long history of sexual offenses, the prosecutor recommended a 5-year prison sentence. However, since Westley had not actually committed a crime in this particular incident, the court once again handed down a lenient sentence. Ultimately, he was only given probation and ordered to undergo psychiatric treatment. Once the probation period ended, Westley immediately stopped treatment and moved to Vancouver, Washington. There, he found a job as a transportation clerk, which not only provided him with a stable income, but also allowed him to continue moving freely within the community, searching for new targets. In the early autumn of 1989, he set his sights on David Douglas Park in Vancouver. Known for its dense trees, winding paths, and relatively secluded environment, the park became an ideal location in his eyes for finding potential victims. Over the next few years, Westley was arrested multiple times for child molestation, but each time he was sentenced to short-term imprisonment and court-mandated treatment. These brief punishments and superficial treatments failed to curb his criminal behavior. On the contrary, his desires and violent tendencies grew stronger, eventually escalating into even more horrifying crimes. Wesley's total number of victims amounted to approximately 50, all under the age of 12, with some as young as 2 years old. Most of them were boys, innocent, unsuspecting children who became victims of his twisted desires. Over time, Wesley's sexual fantasies became increasingly violent. He later stated during interrogation, "The more I thought about it, the more exciting the idea of murder sounded. I planned many ways to kill a boy." A psychiatric doctor pointed out that Westley met the legal criteria for a sexual psychopath. His actions were not merely driven by sexual impulses, but were accompanied by an extreme craving for violence and control. This psychological state left him utterly devoid of compassion for children's lives, even viewing murder as an exhilarating act. On September 4th, 1989, Westley entered the park carrying a sharp fillet knife and several shoelaces. His goal was clear: to find a young boy and carry out the murder he had repeatedly rehearsed in his mind. At the time, the park was filled with the laughter and playful noises of children, while Westley, like a lurking predator, calmly observed his surroundings. Soon his gaze locked on to 11-year-old Cole Nair and his 10-year-old brother William Nair, who were playing in the park, completely unaware of the danger approaching. Westley approached them with a friendly demeanor, using lies and deceit to lure them to a secluded corner, far from the sight of others. There, Westley forced the two brothers to undress and tied them to a tree with the shoelaces he had brought. He then sexually assaulted both children, the entire process filled with violence and control. After the assault, His violent actions did not stop. He took out the fillet knife and repeatedly stabbed Cole and William until they collapsed in a pool of blood. Then he fled the scene, leaving the two children in the woods. Shortly after, other park visitors discovered Cole and William. Cole was found dead at the scene, while William tragically passed away on the way to the nearby hospital. However, Westley did not stop his depraved actions. After the murders, he created a scrapbook containing news articles and clippings about the case. This scrapbook not only documented his crimes, but also served as a tool to satisfy his twisted psyche. On October 29th, Westley drove to Portland, Oregon, where he encountered 4-year-old Lee Isali and his 9-year-old brother Justin playing in a local park. Lee was sliding up and down on a slide while Justin watched nearby. Westley approached them with a friendly demeanor and successfully convinced Lee to play with him using lies. Justin was preparing to go home, and Westley told Lee that he would drive him home. The naive Lee believed him and got into his car without suspicion. He took Lee to his apartment in Vancouver without drawing any attention along the way. Once inside the apartment, he ordered Lee to undress, tied him to the bed with rope, and sexually assaulted him. Not only did he abuse Lee, but he also photographed the entire process, as if these images were trophies of his twisted desires. Then Lee was forced to spend the night in his apartment, during which Westley continued to abuse him while meticulously documenting every detail in his diary. The next morning, Westley strangled Lee with a rope and hung his body in a closet, taking photographs of it. These photos became part of his collection, a grim record of his complete disregard for life. Westley later admitted to the police that he had not initially intended to kill Lee, but felt compelled to do so to prevent the boy from becoming a witness to his crimes. To cover up his actions, Westley stuffed Lee's body into a garbage bag and discarded it in the bush near Vancouver Lake. For the following month, Westley kept a low profile, spending most of his time in his apartment. He wrote down plans for future child abductions and even constructed a homemade torture rack for his next victim. On November 13th, Westley's criminal activities came to the end. That day, he drove to Camas, Washington, a small town about 12 miles east of Vancouver. His target was a 6-year-old boy, James Kirk II, at a local theater. As usual, he attempted to lure the boy away from the theater. However, this time, his plan did not go as expected. When he tried to carry James out of the theater lobby, the boy began to struggle violently and cried out loudly. His cries caught the attention of theater staff, who quickly became suspicious of Westley. Faced with their pursuit, Westley had no choice but to release James and hurriedly fled to his car in an attempt to escape. Meanwhile, James's mother's boyfriend, William Graves, arrived at the theater. Upon being informed that the boy had nearly been abducted, he immediately left the theater and chased after Westley. He soon spotted Wesley's car, which had broken down on the side of the road due to engine trouble. To avoid alerting the kidnapper and to buy time, Graves pretended to be a helpful passerby and offered to assist with the car repairs. The moment Westley let his guard down, Graves swiftly subdued him and brought him back to the theater, where staff called the police. The Camas police arrived promptly at the scene. During the investigation, the Camas police quickly realized that Westley might be connected to the murder of Lee Isali, which the Portland police were investigating. They contacted the Portland Police Task Force and took Westley to the Camas police station for initial questioning. He was then transferred to the Clark County Jail in Vancouver, where Portland detectives interrogated him for 3 days. Under pressure, Westley eventually confessed to all 3 murders, the deaths of Cole, William, and Lee. With his confession, the police swiftly searched Westley's residence. In his apartment, they discovered chilling evidence: a homemade torture rack, newspaper clippings about his crimes, a briefcase containing Lee's underwear, a photo album with pictures of Lee, and various advertisements for children's underwear cut from newspapers and store catalogs. Additionally, the police found Westley's diary, in which he detailed the events of each murder, his psychological state, and his plans for future crimes. Westley was formally charged with aggravated first-degree murder in the deaths of Cole, William, and Lee, as well as the attempted kidnapping of another child. During his trial at the Clark County Superior Court, the prosecution read excerpts from his diary and presented photos of Lee's captivity to the jury, revealing the brutal details of his crimes. However, the defense called no witnesses and presented no evidence, arguing only that he was legally insane. Ultimately, the jury found Westley guilty and agreed with the prosecutor's request for the death penalty. Throughout the trial, Westley remained eerily calm. He claimed that defending himself was pointless and criticized the U.S. judicial system as a failure. In 1990, Westley was formally sentenced to death for the murders of Cole and William as well as the rape and murder of Lee. Under Washington state law, Westley had the option to choose between lethal injection or hanging. He chose hanging, stating that he wanted to end his life in the same manner he had taken Lee's. His choice of execution method sparked some controversy. The American Civil Liberties Union filed a lawsuit, arguing that hanging violated the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Although the case reached the Washington Supreme Court, it did not halt Westley's execution, primarily because he himself had chosen hanging. Less than 4 years passed between Westley's conviction and his execution. He refused to appeal his case or the death sentence, insisting that he could not control his impulses and would kill again if released. In a court brief, he stated, "I must be executed before I have a chance to escape or kill someone else. If I do escape, I promise you I will kill and rape again, and I will enjoy every minute of it." He also claimed that death would free him from the guilt of his murders. While awaiting execution, Westley wrote a pamphlet advising parents on how to protect their children from predators like himself, a deeply ironic act, as if he were attempting to justify his crimes in some way. At 12:05 a.m. on January 5, 1993, Westley was executed by hanging at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. This marked the first hanging in the United States since George York and James Latham were executed in Kansas in 1965. On the day of the execution, a crowd gathered outside the prison, with some supporting the execution and others protesting the death penalty. The media extensively covered the event, even detailing the history of hanging, the sound of the trapdoor, the type of rope used, and how the rope was prepared for optimal effect. For the last meal, Westley requested grilled salmon and fried potatoes. Standing on the gallows' second floor, he delivered his final words. "Someone once asked me, I don't remember who, if there was any way to stop sex offenders. I said no, but I was wrong. I said there is no hope, no peace, but I was wrong. Hope exists. Peace is here. I have found both in the Lord Jesus Christ. Look to the Lord, and you will find peace." Then 12 local and regional media members, prison officials, and family members of the 3 victims witnessed the execution. After being pronounced dead by the prison doctor, Westley's body was transported to Seattle for an autopsy. The King County medical examiner found that he had died quickly within 2 to 3 minutes, but not from a broken neck. Following the autopsy, his body was cremated, and the ashes were given to his family.